Hello everyone, this is Mr. E2099, and today I'm reviewing episodes 6 and 7 of Goblin Slayer. Uh, these two episodes are really action-packed. They're really great. So let's start with episode 6 first. The party goes into the city, and they go into a large city where they're going to meet their quest giver, which is the Archbishop of the Church of Justice. And the Archbishop is also known as the Sword Maiden, who is someone who helped defeat the Demon King a couple decades ago. So she's a very well-known adventurer. She's actually a gold-ranked adventurer, so she's higher than the people in the party. And Goblin Slayer doesn't really care who she is as long as she has a quest that allows him to kill goblins. But the priestess, who's meeting a very high official in her church, is, very flustered and nervous. But they find out that there's been some murders and kidnappings within the city, and when one of the guards killed a small person who they saw attacking somebody, it turned out that it was a goblin. And they did some investigating and found out that the goblins were living in the sewers underneath the city. That actually makes a lot of sense for goblins. But, they have soldiers and guards, but, because these are goblins that they're dealing with, none of them really care all that much about dealing with them. So, that's why they hired Goblin Slayer and his friends to, take care of the job. So, they get a map and head down into the sewer, and they're going along, and eventually they see goblins on a boat floating down the channel in the sewer. So kind of like pirate goblins, if you've ever played, like a fantasy RPG, like something like Magic the Gathering. I've seen goblins that have been depicted as pirates, so it's essentially like that. So, Goblin Slayer made a promise to the priestess and the elf to not use poison, water, or fire to destroy the goblins because it might end up damaging the sewers, which could be dangerous to the city. So, initially, he tells the dwarf to make a rock, a large boulder, and drop it into the channel to drain the water out. But again, they tell him that he can't do this because the sewage would end up being backed up. So he has the priestess throw up a protection barrier, and he throws a hollowed out egg. Now, they don't show him constructing this. I think they might have showed him constructing this in an earlier episode, but inside the egg is actually pepper and ground up glass, and he throws it and the powder goes everywhere and, irritates the eyes of the goblins, temporarily blinding them. So he and the lizard man, jump off into the boat, and they start, taking out fools one by one, and, they actually end up knocking them into the water because the goblins are wearing armor, and, with the heavy armor, they would just sink and drown. So, they start taking out the goblins, knocking them out, and then the dwarf actually creates a boulder and drops it into the boat to sink it. And Goblin Slayer and the Lizard Man jump out of the way just in time so they don't get caught up in it. But eventually, the adventurers discover that the sewer is also home to a very large albino alligator. The elf calls it a swamp dragon, which, when you consider what an alligator looks like, again, it makes a lot of sense. I don't know if it's an alligator or a crocodile. I'm never really sure about that. But anyway, they have this idea to use a spell called Holy Light at the tip of the gator's tail, so that the goblins on a second boat, they'll see the light, and they've come to know that adventurers use light when it's dark, so they'll be drawn to it thinking it's adventurers, but it's actually the giant alligator. And then when they get close, the alligator just chomps on their boat, and you see the adventurers looking on as the goblins just get decimated by this alligator. You see him tossing them into the air and then snapping his jaws and ripping them in half. Anyway, that's essentially where they close their adventure out for the day. They exit the sewers, and Goblin Slayer starts thinking that goblins don't normally use boats, and that somebody would have had to teach them how to use them, and that if they had known that there was a giant alligator in there, then they never would have used boats in the first place, which gets him to, he gets into Batman mode and starts using some deductive reasoning, thinking that somebody actually brought the goblins into the city and then taught them how to use the boats on purpose. Somebody intentionally caused the goblin infestation of the city. Anyway, that's essentially where episode 6 leaves off. Let's get into episode 7. And episode 7 is a really action-packed episode. People say that after the first episode, Goblin Slayer wasn't as dark as before. This episode clears that right up. It starts off with the priestess in the temple taking a bath, and the archbishop comes in. They start bathing together and talking, and during the course of the conversation, the priestess realizes that the high priestess, the archbishop, has had encounters with goblins before. So, that is, I've read the manga, so that is something that's going to come up later, but, Goblin Slayer, goes off to send a message back to the town that they were from, and, they head back into the sewer to deal with the rest of the goblins. They go into a large door, and they eventually realize it's a trap. And Goblin Slayer, before that they had gone back down, had actually brought a canary because he wanted to be certain that there wasn't any poisonous gas. And that's highly fortunate because after the goblins lock them into this room, they start pumping poison gas into the room that they're in. But Goblin Slayer has these cloths with charcoal in them to kind of act like a rudimentary gas mask, and they start plugging the cracks of the room so that the gas can't get in. After the goblins realize that the gas is starting to back up, they start, bursting down the door, and a fight ensues. And initially it's going very well, but after they start winning, this giant figure comes bursting through the door, and it's a goblin champion. Goblin champions are essentially the silver ranked of goblins. So, Goblin Slayer goes to attack the champion, and right when he's about to stab him with his sword, the goblin champion blocks the blade with another goblin. He just picks up one of his minions and uses him as a shield, essentially. And then he knocks Goblin Slayer right the fuck out. And after that, shit starts going south really bad. Seeing Goblin Slayer, just beaten that badly causes the priestess to lose focus, and her protection spell wears off, and she starts panicking. Meanwhile, the elf gets swarmed by goblins, and they start ripping off, a lot of her clothes with the intention of sexually assaulting her. And the dwarf is trying to, beat through this horde of goblins to try and, rescue her. And meanwhile, the lizard man is also getting swarmed. And the goblin champion actually grabs the priestess, picks her up, actually takes a bite out of her shoulder, just bites into it. And, she starts screaming, she's panicking, she's thinking that this is the end, kind of like the way she felt in the episode 1. But then they turns back to Goblin Slayer, and Goblin Slayer goes full Doom Guy mode and literally embodies the meme of man is too angry to die. He picks himself back up. He grabs some hair on the ground that was actually used as part of a trap, to lure them in, and he jumps up behind the Goblin Champion and uses the hair as a garrote wire and starts choking him out. The Goblin Slayer, he's hanging on for dear life, even as he's coughing up blood. And, he has the Goblin Champion freaking out. He's swinging his massive club everywhere, killing other goblins. And eventually, Goblin Slayer turns towards the front and punches the champion right in the eye, blinding him in one eye. And then Goblin Slayer drops to the ground. He picks himself back up and he says, "Alright, who's next, motherfuckers?" And the goblins, after seeing their boss get laid out like that, they all start running away because goblins are cowards. The elf is saved, and, the lizard man is, bandaging up the priestess. And, they start to try and make their way back to the surface to, heal their wounds and regroup when Goblin Slayer collapses. He's dead. My boy Goblin Slayer is dead. He died. But I've read the manga, and if you think death can stop the Goblin Slayer, you are fucking mistaken. There's 5 episodes left in this series, so if you think that death is going to hold Goblin Slayer back from murdering goblins, you clearly haven't been paying attention. But anyway, I'm going to leave off the review for here because that's essentially where the episode stops. Man, I love this episode. It had everything. It had great action, brutality, badassery. This is why I watch Goblin Slayer. This is why I read the Goblin Slayer manga. And it's beautiful to see this animated. And, it's going to get better, in the next couple episodes because, they're not done, wiping these guys out. But anyway, this has been Mr. E1299. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, share this video if you enjoyed it, and I will see you all later.